On today's Lock Up Giants podcast, some more thoughts about the direction the New York Giants are heading in 2025. That's going to be right next here on the Lock On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia, Traina, credential member of the New York Giants. You for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find all my written work. And as always, we welcome on in our Blue Crew community members, our everydayers, our newcomers, and everybody in between. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And on today's show, I have some leftover thoughts, just some takeaways on the direction that this Giants team is headed. And I have to tell you, folks, I like a lot of what they're doing, how they're looking. I'm very optimistic. I know hope springs eternal when it's the springtime and there's snow pads and everything like that, but there's enough here, I think, to be encouraged about. So I'm going to run down some of the things that I really like and also give you some thoughts about some direction I think that the team is going to take in certain areas on today's show. All right, so let's get right into it. Also, I also have a couple of leftover notes from yesterday, but want to start off with Brian Dable and just kind of how he has set things up this offseason. Now, Brian Dable, he lobbied for Jackson Dart. We all know that. We've seen enough of that. We've read about it and whatnot. Dable's been spending a lot of time with Jackson Dart practice, which is not a surprise in itself. That has meant that Mike Kafka, the offensive coordinator, has been on the radio all spring. Now, that could indicate that Mike Kafka is going to call the plays this coming fall, and it could not, it might mean something else. So here's something that, I had thought about. Given how much time Dable has spent with Jackson Dart and how much more time he's still going to spend with him, because remember, Dart was kind of his hand-picked quarterback. I would not be surprised if Mike Kafka starts off as the play caller and remains the play caller this year for as long as Russell Wilson is the starter or if James Winston is the starter. The second, if this happens, I don't know if it's going to happen, but the moment Jackson Dart gets in the game as a full-time starter, I suspect you're going to see Brian Dable take over the play calling. And the reason why I say that is because it makes sense. I mean, think about it. Brian Dable is never far from Jackson Dart when they're going through drills. We saw that in OTA number 2, where, Kafka was working on the one end of the field with Russell Wilson and with Jameis Winston. Dable was on the other side of the field working with Tommy DeVito and Jackson Dart. So, you saw, or we saw, I should say, Mike Kafka had the radio in his hand. So he was radioing in plays to, Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston. Dable, on the other hand, when it was Jackson Dart's turn to throw or Tommy DeVito's turn to throw, Dable was standing right there, basically meeting up with the quarterbacks every time, before they took the snap in their turn in the rotation. So I just have a gut feeling that the plan, obviously I'll keep an eye on this, but I suspect the plan is that Dable will take back the play calling once Dart gets in there. And it makes sense. Again, he's in his ear like literally all day when the kid is in the facility. So it makes sense to build up that camaraderie, to build up that comfort level, and to, ultimately say, okay, you know what, Mike Kafka, you work with Russell Wilson, James Winston. They've been around a while. They kind of know what they're doing. They just have to learn our terminology and whatnot. You work with them. I'll work with the kid. and I'll get the kid ready. So that's how I think that's going to play out. And, you know, along those lines, the benefit of that, Dable has been visiting, if you will, more often with the defense and with special teams. So, last year when Dable took over the play calling, and we all knew that he was going to do it because it was like one of the worst kept secrets last year, Dable spent a lot of time more so during offense, not as much time with defense and not a whole lot of time with special teams. And what did we see, last year? Yeah, the offense was a problem, but the defense and special teams weren't that great either. So you're going back to seeing more of a CEO approach with Brian Dable, with the offense, the defense, the special teams. And oh, by the way, Dable is still kind of calm out there. I have yet to see him pop his cork over anything. And you figure this time of year, you know, mistakes are going to be made. And he's been calmer about it in his approach to, working with the quarterbacks, working with the rest of the team. And just, it's a different aura, if you will, with the coaching and with what Brian Abel is doing. And it's actually, it's almost reminiscent of what we saw in his first year in 2022 when he won Coach of the Year. So we can only hope that the results of the change, and again, I think this is what direction it's going in. We can only hope that this is going to play out and work out the way 2022 worked out for the Giants. This is just a little side note here. He was asked today, my good friend Ed Valentine, if there were plans for a joint practice. And I know some of you guys and gals have asked me about joint practices. Abel, when he was asked that question, shook his head yes, but while he was shaking his head yes, he said we're still working through some of that detail. Now, by process of elimination, I had to take a wild guess as to if or when they're going to do it. I suspect the Giants will have their joint practices if they do it. Look for it to happen against the Jets and not Buffalo, as I know some of the Buffalo writers maybe speculated would be the case. Buffalo, if I'm not mistaken, I think they have joint practices with the Lions. I think it's the week after the Giants. They see the Giants in week 1 of the preseason. So I don't know that Buffalo is going to do joint practices 2 weeks in a row. So I'm pretty sure, by process of elimination, it's going to be the Jets. The Giants and the Jets will do joint practice. That's just my guess, but certainly Brian Dable kind of confirmed that joint practices are going to happen. But, working out the details, that could be, when they're going to happen, how many are they going to do, where are they going to do it, and so on and so forth. So just wanted to throw that out there. I know a lot of you would ask me about that. All right. Coming up next, more leftover observations and thoughts about the Giants and the direction they're headed. So don't go anywhere. Hey, Giant fans, the NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. And FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live. You can win big on such things as player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays. Just think your first $5 winning bet can yield you $200 in bonus bets to add to the excitement. So if you're new to FanDuel, it is the perfect time to sign up at FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to Locked on Giants. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, and we're just rolling right along here on the Locked on Giants podcast. Starting next week, technically, we go to our summer schedule, but you know what? There's still so much more football to happen. Next week, we've got another media avail on Thursday. It'll be OTA number 6. We still have the mandatory mini camp coming up. And then before that, one more OTA access day. So still a lot of football to talk about. And we'll, of course, bring you all that here on the Locked on Giants podcast. Today, just some miscellaneous random thoughts, some leftovers from OTA number 2. You know, I didn't put a whole lot of stock really in the performance on the field because, again, there's no pads, there's no contact. There's little things that you kind of pick up on that kind of made me feel good about the direction this team is headed. And I've got to talk about the defense. Now, interestingly, Joe Shane, the general manager, put a lot of love towards the Giants defense in the offseason. This after the previous year when really the only thing he was able to accommodate or bring in for the Giants defense was Brian Burns. This year, the focus was on the defense. And from what I understand, that wasn't planned, but that's how it kind of worked out. We really wanted to add, to the offensive line a little bit more, and a couple of offensive weapons, and they weren't able to do that. But they ended up really pouring some personnel into the defense. Now, here's why I feel a little bit better about the defense this year than maybe I did last year. Shane Bowen's system, this is year 2 for all the guys, and the newcomers, obviously, they're learning it. But, you go back and you look at Shane Bowen and what he did in Tennessee and, how he had good run defenses and all that stuff. And then, he comes to the Giants and you say, what's he doing here? The run defense wasn't very good. Um, his schemes didn't fit the personnel. And, if you step back and you think about it, Bowen didn't have the personnel that he had in Tennessee. Matter of fact, the more you think about it, the more it's like Bowen had fit square pegs into round holes last year. And when you have to do that, it just makes everything look wonky, if you will. So the Giants, by adding more defensive players with the talent and the versatility to allow Bowen to do what he wants to do, I think there's reason to believe that things might be better for the defense. Now, particularly run defense, which was a big, big problem for the Giants last year. So, you go back and you look at the run defense and the issues that unit had. Guys weren't filling holes. Guys weren't getting off blocks. Guys were taking bad angles. Guys were trying to do too much. They, instead of just worrying about their job, they were worrying about other people's jobs, trying to clean things up. And that was a result of, again, just not having the right personnel in place, not having, the right fits and whatnot. This year, we didn't see any of the running game because, again, that's something you need the pads for. That's a contacts activity. So you're not going to see a whole lot with the running game in the spring. But that being said, this year, I feel like they have better personnel to deal with the run. And Bobby Okereke spoke about that actually in his media avail. He talked about, year 2 in the system, the new talent that they brought in, and how, the anticipation is that they'll be better against the run because they'll be able to fly faster. They'll be able to come up and fill the holes and not have to think about things and not have to worry about, oh, is the guy next to me doing his job right? Do I have to go and cover for him? So, that's something that still remains to be seen, and we won't see that until training camp. But there is optimism that the run defense is going to be a heck of a lot better this year. And, that's going to spill back, not just the run defense, but the front 7 is going to spill back and have an effect on the back end of the defense where you have a lot of young veterans. All right. Now, obviously, you guys know that the Giants made over half of the back end of the defense. New safety in Javon Holland, new quarterback in Paul Sonadebo. Those guys, their jobs theoretically should be a lot easier this year because of the front 7. If the front 7 can do their job, get home with 4, which is the plan, that back end is going to maybe be in a better position to create turnovers, to be more effective, to come up, and support the run a little bit better than they did. And, the shift that they have in the secondary with Adebo expected to be the CB1. I think some of the onus off of Deontay Banks. Now, it's interesting. With Deontay Banks, in his rookie season, I think having Xavier McKinney on the field with him helped him. When Xavier McKinney left for Green Bay last year, that's when Deontay Banks kind of fell off the rails a little bit. So this year, you bring in a Paulson Adebo, who, is a young veteran, but still a veteran nonetheless. You bring in a Javon Holland, and I just feel like the support system for Deontay Banks is going to be a little bit better than it maybe was last year. And that's not to knock what they had last year, but Tyler Rubin, he was a rookie. Drew Phillips, a rookie. You know, really, where was the veteran leadership? You could say, well, what about Adoree Jackson? Yeah, Adoree's a good guy, but he's they moved on from him, and they were originally going to bring him back, but they did because of the injuries that happened with Cordell Flott and all those guys. So I think the leadership that they brought in is going to not only help the back end of the defense, it's going to help Deontay Banks, who just again just seemed lost last year. Without Xavier McKinney, without a veteran voice back there. So we'll see. If, time will tell. Obviously, it's early, but just listening to Javon Holland talk and again observing and watching the interaction between the defensive players during the drills and stuff, there was a lot more communication. That to me, was very encouraging because I don't remember there being as much communication on the back end of the defense or on the defense on the whole last year, which I thought at the time was kind of odd considering they had a new defensive coordinator and they weren't communicating as much as they could have last year. This year, that is not the case. In practice that I saw, there was a lot of communication going on. We'll see if it pays off dividends, for them moving forward. All right, coming up next, I have a few remaining thoughts that I'll share with you. And that's coming up right after this. All right, Giants, welcome back to Locked On Giants. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. And I have a few remaining thoughts that I just want to kind of air out. I don't want you to think that I'm trying to paint a picture that's all rosy. There's a lot to like with the Giants this year so far. And I know it's only the spring. Championships are not won in the spring. I get that. But there's a lot to like. There's also a few concerns that, if if we're keeping this real, which I try to do here on the show, things that I have to mention. And I want to start with Evan Neal. Now, after getting the fantastic response I got from Greg Van Roten about the challenges of playing inside with guard at the guard position, one of the things Van Roten said, and if you watched yesterday's show, you saw the clip. I played the clip for you. But one of the things Van Roten said was you're facing more athletic, quicker guys inside. So you've got to be on with your footwork, with your hand and punch, all the stuff. And, play inside an oval is not necessarily helpful. It's not an advantage. And I go back to Evan Neal when he played a tackle. And what were some of the issues that Evan Neal had? Inconsistent hand punch, poor footwork, all right? Just, he was inconsistent. So here's something that, I'm going to ask Carmen Brasillo and the assistant coaches talk to the media, which I think is coming up next month. It's a question for Carmen, but what makes them think that Evan Neal, that footwork is going to be resolved? It's going to be better. Now, maybe it will be. Maybe you could say, well, Evan Neal had the problem because of the ankle issues, and that's why his footwork was all over the place. Or maybe, he just never got comfortable lining up on an island, whatever the case may be. But it's something that, you say to yourself, well, you struggle with those areas playing tackle. I get it, tackle's a different position. How is that going to translate inside? And that's a question for Brasillo, which, hopefully I'll get to ask him if I can get over to his little pile when they have it. I think it's a valid question now. It's the other thing, the other challenge I think with Evan Neal is he's a little tall for a guard. So how is his pad level going to be? Is that going to be a problem? Is he going to let guys get underneath him? That's a concern I have as well. So really, folks, I mean, these are questions that still need to be answered, and I do intend to ask them and see if we can get an answer. But um, I can't sit here and say that I am convinced that it'll be successful. I hope it is. I know Evan Neal is going to work at it, but I'm not going to lie to you. I have some concerns still about that particular conversion. And I'm hoping that those concerns go away before the spring breaks. But we'll see, obviously. Summertime will tell when they put the pads on. All right. I mentioned this yesterday, and this is about old neighbors and his toe. Hopefully, the medical staff, in just resting him and letting him, heal if that toe injury, became an issue. Now, I have no idea when that toe issue popped up this year again. Because think about it, folks. The Giants, they had months off from the end of the season. So any ailments should have theoretically healed when they returned to the field for I'm sorry, phase two. That's when the guys actually got out on the field with the coaches and stuff like that. So are they telling us that, oh, the toe issue because it was last season, we just want to be safe? Or did that toe issue pop up at some point during phase two of the offseason program to where they're like, okay, let's medical up this guy. We need him. Let's let him rest and not worry about him, for the OTAs or mini camp because we know what he can do. And that's a question that nobody's going to answer, but it's a fair question to ask because look, we know Brian Weeble told us that Malik Neighbors did not have any kind of procedure done on his toe. All right. But given the amount of expected snaps that Malik Neighbors is going to play this year, let's face it, he's going to probably get like 80%, if not more, of the snaps he's going to be on the field. Is that injury going to hold up? Do they have to maybe put in, some kind of padding or something special in his shoe? And if so, how is that going to affect his gait? How's that going to affect his speed and all the things he does well? I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if they would tell us. They probably wouldn't tell us that. But I'm not going to lie, that's a little bit of a concern for me because, again, Malik Neighbors, even though, he's had this toe issue since college, which, apparently he never had addressed surgically. And I blame him. I mean, who out there is going to be fit to undergo, a surgery? But again, they had months off for any ailments to heal. So the fact that there was no procedure done, the fact that now they're backing off him, I don't know. To me, something's just, it's a situation to keep an eye on. And I'm going to be curious to see if Malik Neighbors gets on the field at all this spring. He doesn't need to. I get it. They know what he can do. But still, you kind of want to get him out there, have him catch passes from the quarterbacks in a practice setting, build all that stuff up. And, what's he going to be able to do for the rest of the spring? That to me is kind of a question mark, because then they're going to have 6 weeks before training camp starts. So something to keep an eye on for sure. Okay. Final thought on Giants. Overall, I really like this roster. I think without question, this is the best roster that they have had in the Brian Dable era. You look at the last time Giants, there's an exercise we're going to do over on New York Giants on SI where we're comparing 2016. The Giants were really, halfway decent. We're going to compare the skill position players on offense with the skill position players they have here. And that's an exercise that maybe I'll do here on the show at some point. But overall, you look at the talent that they had on offense for the skill position players in 2016 compared to this year, much better this year. And remember, 2016, they had Eli Manning. They had, I think Rashad Jennings was the running back. Odell, I believe, was on the roster. So, the tight end, I can't remember who the tight end was, but I remember it wasn't, I think it was Will Tye was the tight end. Much better roster this year. Russell Wilson, Tyrell Tracy, Theo Johnson, Malik Neighbors. I mean, much, much better. So you'd like to think that the offense is going to be more potent. And, I know one of the concerns that some people had is, well, they really didn't change the offense up that much from last year when the offense was bad. We're going to find out soon enough if it was the quarterback that held them up or held them back, which, I believe that's what the Giants thought, or if they just totally missed the mark, not fixing this offense moving forward. So a lot still to be determined. And as always, we bring you all our observations and insight and all that. All right, Giant fans, before we say goodbye, first, thank you for making the Locked On Giants podcast your first listen of the day. For your second listen, do check out the Locked On NFL Scouting podcast. As training camps get closer and moves are being made, hosts Kyle Krabs and Phil Marino will make you among the most important NFL fans this offseason. Find Locked On NFL Scouting on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. All right, Giant fans, that's going to do it for me. I will see you again. Have a good one.